Good evening. I'd like to open the 11th meeting of fiscal year 2020 of the Milton Planning Board. I'm Cheryl Tagayas, the chair.
Rich Beeler, member.
Julia Getman, clerk.
William Clark, Planning Director.
Allison Quinn, Assistant Planner.
April Anderson, member.
Kathleen O'Donnell, member.
Okay, we have a mistake on the agenda. We did not have executive session tonight, but we will have executive session at 6:30 on the 18th of December, our next meeting.
So I just want to make a note, I can't be here on
You can't be here on the 18th. We were moving it from the 19th to the 18th because we thought we were going to have a quorum problem, but
If you're not going to have a quorum problem, you can move it back to the 19th.
okay, so let's wait till Denny's here and we'll come back to that. How's that? Under administrative, we received a copy of the application for a comprehensive permit for 485 Blue Hills Parkway as courtesy, basically, because we don't have a formal application that comes to us for that purpose. Would the board have an interest in providing information to the select board to include in their letter in response to DHCD relative to that comprehensive permit?
In what context?
Comments about how the planning board had sponsored zoning related to that site and give some background as to what the thoughts behind that zoning were, what the planning board was hoping might come in as an application for that site.
So the only apprehension I would have, and you know more about this, Kathleen, is that we don't actually have any dog in this fight, really, right? And I don't want to undercut the ZBA.
No, well, we won't. But this is a preliminary decision. Because what happens is that the MS Housing sends a letter to the selectmen and says, hi, somebody has filed an application for a 40B comprehensive permit. Essentially, do you have any comments on this? And so that's really when the town could come in to say, it's a, imaginary, it's a historic building and we don't see that that's being preserved, or, we have issues with X, Y, and Z.
Or we pass zoning for a mixed-use project.
So we pass zoning for a mixed-use project, and we're not happy about the fact that there's no commercial use here, it's just residential, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we could throw those comments in, and then the selectmen can decide yes or no, what they want it to do or not with it. It doesn't really mean anything so much to the ZBA, although we did, when I was on the ZBA, we did look at the letters that the selectmen did send back on the Hendry's plant and on Randolph Ave. And when the ZBA was considering those applications, they already knew that there was some concern. And so we could say, okay, fine, in the hearings, we could say, you applicant, could you address these particular issues? So it's not so much saying, oh, we don't want this, but to sort of frame the discussion, to say we do have some concerns about X, Y, or Z. As I said, we went through the whole process of adopting zoning for the ice house. And, this application doesn't come anywhere near what we had already expressed and what town meeting had expressed for what it wanted on the site. And so I think it's appropriate for us to make a comment to say, we had the zoning, and we're willing to work with whoever the applicant is to address the parts of the zoning that may be a problem.
Bill?
The developer has taken and sent a site approval application to Mass Housing. This is just on the site. So Kathleen is right in her comment that now is the time to state what your issues are for that site, where the planning board and town meeting took all the time to put together mixed-use zoning for that site, should be put into the town's site applicability letter.
So there's a site walk that.
December 11th.
December 11th at 8 or 8:30? We're
Yeah,
waiting for
we don't know which
confirmation.
time yet. The request went out verbally and in writing, and we don't have an answer yet.
So we could participate without posting a meeting as long as we have no discussion? If there's more than two of us that go?
We'll post the meeting, and if
Okay.
somebody wants to ask questions, ask the questions.
Okay.
The developer will be there that day. Mass Housing will be there that day. There will be other boards, because I have to take and make sure that all the different boards in town are notified. I sent it to the Historic Commission, the Conservation Commission, the Board of Health, the department heads. The application for site approval is on the town's website, on the front page. Scroll down, it's right on the first line there. All of the application, the letter that came from Mass Housing, there's a book in there from Mass Housing Partnership that goes in and gives an explanation of what to do, that one. Is that Mass Housing Partnership?
Top,
Yep.
yeah.
The handbook for the zoning board of appeals. It gives a good breakdown of it. There's also a fact sheet in there from CHAPA, which gives a much shorter explanation in 4 pages. The whole application is 96 pages with conceptual images of what the building is expected to look like. There's a site plan in there of existing conditions. Selectmen will be taking comments in preparation of writing their letter. So the public has a choice of sending their comments to the selectmen and/or Mass Housing.
But if they're sent to the select board, then they can get considered for the letter.
The select board is going to wind up getting comments from all the different parties, and they will synthesize those comments and come up with that's their point of view. If people have a difference of opinion or want to do something stronger in their comment, go directly to Mass Housing.
Okay, so what we then could consider is having a discussion after folks have a chance to review, folks on this board have a chance to review the application and perhaps participate in the site walk, to then have a discussion at our next meeting, because comments would need to get to the select board fairly soon, right? In order for them to include it.
We usually, once Mass Housing mails out that letter, the town has 30 days. Knowing that the letter was sent the day before Thanksgiving, knowing that we got the letter on Monday, we basically had a snow day on Tuesday, and the selectmen met Tuesday night. We asked for an additional 30 days. They give us anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks due to the time of year. You've got Christmas, Hanukkah, you've got the New Year. Comments would have been due on the 27th of December, and that's really pushing people to come up with that kind of comment letter that quickly. So we asked for 30 days. If we get 2 to 3 weeks, we'll be fine.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
Just to move us along, maybe, Bill or somebody can start a letter?
Someone's
Somebody?
volunteered.
I would-
Oh, okay, good. And then if we need to, we can
Yeah.
circulate it and
Right.
collect additional comments or something,
Yep.
just get it moving.
Yep,
Rather than wait until our next
Right,
meeting to even
right.
start that.
No, that was definitely going to do that.
Thank you.
I'm coordinating the letter, the draft letter for the selectmen already.
So Kathleen's
That's-
experience on the Board of Appeal and
Yep.
and review of these,
The
she's
fact
going
that
to,
I've done like, I don't know how many 40Bs, yeah.
I did this with Kathleen on 2 others?
2 others here, but that's
No, I did with
unfortunately-
you, 2 others.
Yeah,
and I'm going to look at the architectural and site planning aspect of it from context point of view, the rest of Milton, but, and provide some comments to Kathleen.
Great.
Okay?
Thank you.
So I just,
Oh, I think Debbie.
Denny, yes?
I know I came late to the dance here, but, so my first concern is the extent of the density, the 56 units on 2 acres.
So Denny, one thing that right now, since it's not on our agenda to
Right.
discuss.
we have nothing to say about that. I mean, we can say but it's a site eligibility letter, so it's whether or not the site is appropriate. So there are issues already in the application that I've noticed where they say, as happened in other applications we got, another application we got, is that they check off the box that says, oh, it's near everything. Well, it isn't.
Right.
And say that it's near a retail center, near jobs, it's near a commercial thing, it's near here, here, there. And this is why it's such a great site. So
Right.
this is the site eligibility letter.
Right.
So this is
So-
our chance to talk about the site specifically, and
yeah.
not the details of the project, but I assume that will come
But the
later.
other
Yeah.
piece of it is the roadway is on the gateway to the Blue Hills. I mean, that's the entry to the Blue Hills. So that's, I'm afraid if you have 56 units, they're going to expect curb cuts through those islands, just for safety reasons alone. And that's just, it's state property, so you have two state agencies.
So one thing, I brought it up because I wanted to see whether the board had an interest in taking a, you know, sort of an official position where we'll vote, you know, some language.
Yeah.
But we'll have, since we don't have it on our agenda, we can't really get into the nitty-gritty of that yet, but we did discuss that we do want to take this up, and we will put it on the agenda for the 18th or 19th. And now that you're here, we're just going to come back to that real quick.
Are we going to ask for the 90-day extension?
It's not, we can't ask.
I know, the select
select board
board, but is
did
the
ask?
town going to ask, is my question.
They did ask for a
You can't
30-day.
get 90.
They asked for
We
30
got 90
days.
for Milton Muse.
That's a different project and a whole different ball of wax. That was a while ago.
So you can't get 90 days after 30 days?
No.
They've asked for 30, they haven't heard yet, Denny.
Okay.
We had planned to change our meeting, if I'm going to jump back to that, unless there's anything else about just how we're going to go about this, Denny? How we'll go about the 485 Blue Hills Parkway?
Well, I just know from Milton Muse that the planning board did a very extensive letter that was actually very effective. I know Alex Whiteside was incredibly helpful as an asset and a resource, I think.
Was that during the site application, or was that, there's two,
That was at
there's
the
a
end of the 90
two-step.
days. That was at
Yeah.
the end of the 90 days, so I'm assuming it was at the second step.
Yeah, because there's the
Site
two-step,
Applicability.
right?
It was for the site applicability.
It was for that, okay.
But-
So,
But that was an entirely different animal from
Yep,
what this project will be.
yep. And that was a while ago. Things have, administration has changed significantly there,
Yes.
so.
But the whole 40B process changed?
Well, some of the regulations have changed, yes, but all of the personnel has changed. And so the regulations have changed, and we already have sort of a history, and not a good one, with the DHCD, so I can't see that they'd be saying 90 days is going to be granted.
We had to fight for it, we had to ask for it, and we had to fight for it. We had grounds, and we did, but
I think if there are particular things, Denny, that you want us to comment on, then maybe you can circulate that to all of us, so we can be thinking about it, looking at the application with those things in mind, and then we can discuss it on the 18th or 19th, which I just want to go back to that if we're ready to do that now. Okay?
sure.
Can you send that to a point person rather than the board, so we
Me.
don't have a discussion?
Send it to me.
Sorry, yeah, send it to Kathleen, thank you. We had talked about changing the meeting from the 19th to the 18th because we were concerned about a quorum.
That's fine.
April is unavailable on the 18th, so should we consider moving it back to the 19th? Do we have, anyone have a problem with the 19th?
I'm
I
fine
do.
with the 19th.
Excuse me, you have a problem with the 19th?
No, I'm
No,
fine
I
with
do.
it.
I'm the one that
You
has
have the problem with the 19th, all right. So, we can't very well talk about the 40B that you're going to draft if you're not here. So do we need to look at another alternative date? The 17th?
Let's see.
We have to check to see that our executive session can be moved that date too, but if,
I'm good, all three. All three are good.
all three are good for you.
Just one
and
of
for
them,
me.
though.
Gotta
be careful.
Then I have a
That's one.
BCDC hearing, but I'd rather skip that than the 19th, so.
Okay. Kathleen, 17th?
It's fine.
Denny?
The 17th is fine.
Okay, Bill, the 17th, good for you?
Can we do executive session in the same night?
We'll have to check with Kevin, either that, or it's not time sensitive, so if it
Okay.
doesn't work, then we can look at January, right? That's my understanding, it's not time
Yes.
sensitive. Couple of updates. Okay, so that's,
So this is still.
Bill, do you have the draft agenda for the 18th? What else we have on that agenda? It's in terms of,
No.
all right, so.
Where are we now?
One, in case there's anyone here who's interested in some of the later items on our agenda, I'm going to suggest that the more extensive Milton Village overlay discussion be held at our meeting now, the 17th. Is there anyone here tonight who has any objection to that?
I'd be fine, but if anybody from the public wanted to do a quick citizen speak. if
Right,
they
well,
didn't
we
have
can,
it.
that's what I was going to
Yeah,
do.
that's
And the
great.
reason is I don't think we have a few things on our agenda tonight, and I think if we can focus on the overlay without having a lot else on the agenda, because it's our last meeting before an article would need to be submitted for the May town meeting, before the select board closes the warrant in early January. Okay, so we'll have a brief update on the East Milton zoning, but again, we might have more discussion about that at our next meeting, just in terms of scope and process, in terms of Judy Barrett's feedback, okay? So with that now, is there anyone here who would like to address the board for citizen speak related to either of those overlay discussions or anything else that's not part of new business and old business? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to our new business, which, Bill?
Paulo, Steve, do you want to make comment about Milton Village?
They'll have time at the next meeting.
You'll
if
have
they
time at the
prefer.
next meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah. I just
And I
wanted to let
just
you know
have to
so you
return
don't
something.
sit through and find we have very little discussion on that tonight, but you're welcome to
wanted to
give us any
thank you for
comments that you
this.
might want to for tonight.
Can I ask
Okay,
you administrative item? You just mentioned, Barrett, when are they, do you know, when are those next two meetings?
They're not
They
scheduled.
have not been set up yet.
They haven't, okay.
January would be some earliest at some.
Just want to
obviously.
make sure they get way ahead this time on scheduling and putting it out there. We had pretty good turnout, but I think it could have been a lot better if we told people weeks in advance.
All right, so we'll move on to 919 Blue Hill Avenue. Welcome.
Thank you.
I always take, yeah,
That's
I
excellent.
always do lots of notes, because it's a target on the meetings, I forget what I wanted to say.
I say for the, off the record, that I'm sick to my stomach about
It's the one below.
what's happening
All that work you
down the
did.
hill.
No, because you're on a mic.
But what?
About the 40B.
So, good evening. Ned Corcoran. I am, feels like deja vu all over again for me on property at 919 Blue Hill Avenue, but I'm joined by Kevin Brady, who is with Little Sprouts, child care developer. His father, Jim, who is kind of my counterpart in Walpole, but is also involved with the Little Sprouts team, and David Silverman from the other STA architectural firm in the city of Boston. And Jesse Johnson, who's behind us, who's Bowler Engineering, he's the site engineer. So this is, sort of go a little bit about quick history, overview of Little Sprouts, the history of the site, and activity that we've been undertaking for the last year and change relative to this property. So Little Sprouts is probably the largest operator of childcare, infant through preschool in eastern Massachusetts. More focused so far, sort of north of the Mass Pike, but are expanding south. There are a number of locations that they're growing in southeastern Massachusetts. They were founded in 1982. I think, Kevin, you actually worked with them at one point. Now you're on the board. They're really a community-based, family-oriented culture, and they have identified a need for additional child care services in Milton. There are waiting lists at a number of the facilities in Milton, and the location here on a state highway is good relative to access for their customer base. They value family first, real passion, innovating, every child, every day, things like that, and have a unique sort of curriculum, how they work with the kids as they grow. So, back up a little bit, 919 Blue Hill Avenue, most of you will remember as the Coulter Landscaping operation here. It's just under 40,000 square feet, sits in a Residence A zone. This is the Atherton Street Fire Station. Atherton Street going back down towards the Curry College athletic fields is dead-ended down below. There are open curb cuts here and along the front. Historically speaking, this was a public school operated by the town of Milton until the early 1950s. It was the Vosa's School, closed in the early 50s and sold with the approval of town meeting in the mid-50s to a operator of a nursery and greenhouse in Hyde Park. Had a lot of customers in Milton, saw an opportunity to purchase and built. And so historically, from the time when it was a school, it has been a mix of a residence and commercial business. This is a 2.5-story dwelling. This was the greenhouse. There was other operations. Tom Coulter bought the property in the early 90s, and for about 25 years conducted his landscaping business roughly back here. He built a large garage barn to house his equipment, and all of the landscaping activities occurred here along the fence line between this, with this abutter and abutter here. That is a large dumpster there, and then you can see operations, mulch piles here, and whatnot. We went through 8 years ago in a fairly extensive rezoning, an overlay for that property because the son of the woman who lived next door saw an opportunity to extract some money from Tom and challenged the landscaping operation that had been in effect for about 15 years. The land court determined that it was an illegal operation, and so we went through a rezoning to create an overlay for the landscaping business. Tom sold the property about 1.5 years ago to the developer who will be leasing the property to Little Sprouts. Little Sprouts is a for-profit childcare operation whose use is exempt from zoning under the Dover Amendment. So like nonprofit educational, like religious, childcare cannot be regulated from a use perspective. It is, however, subject to reasonable regulation relative to density, scale, setbacks, height, parking volume, so those types of things control. A couple of quick slides around. This is, so going back, the next slide will be looking from this point across to the abutter's house. There is you can see from here, and you'll see in another couple of slides, very mature, tall combination of evergreen and deciduous trees along the fence line on the abutter's property, which is significant to the site planning considerations you'll see. If you look from here across this open field, you'll see that there's a gap in that over the fence, and you have a direct view here. So this next view really looks from that southeast corner on Blue Hill Avenue straight across over the fence. You can see the tall, mature trees here, but there's a gap here. And so a lot of these activities that were taking place were, somewhat visible. Tom had put a reasonably scaled fence in here, but it's still not, you can see what was happening. As you go down to the other side of the property, this is the back side of Coulter's dwelling. You can see the old bays where he stored materials, 2.5 stories here. It's actually 3 from here, 2 from the front. There's a fairly significant change in grade from the highway side to the rear. It's about 6 or 7 feet. And so that grade has some significance to site planning as well. You can see on the abutter side of the property, the fairly dense set of mature trees. And if you look down Atherton Street and look back into the property, you can barely see the Coulter dwelling on the other side of these trees, which you can see over the fence here. So we started, they bought this property a little over a year ago. We started with a neighbor meeting about a year ago, followed up with a neighbor meeting in February. So 2 neighbor meetings that started with a building that was really too big for the property. 16,000 square foot building, 8,000 square feet, over 8,000 square feet. Very tight from a parking perspective and otherwise. And after 2 neighbor meetings and 1 meeting with fire chief, police chief, DPW, town engineer, town planner, et cetera, the client at the time said to me, well, are we ready to file? And I said, no, I'm not filing until Little Sprouts gets in front of me and answers all of the operational questions relative to pick up and drop off, site plan, et cetera. How are you going to operate this on a site, a building that's this big and a site that's this small? How's it going to work? Because if I can't ask you all the questions and anticipate the questions and understand the answers and explain them, I can't begin to think about filing. So it went dark for a while, and I got a call back to a meeting about 2 months ago with a whole new team. And now Little Sprouts is leading the charge, and we're now at a building that's 10,000 square feet. So we've got a building that is now almost cut in half, from 16 to 10. And we're looking at 2 options, a preferred 1-story, all-in 1-story option, and a second as-of-right option, I'll explain in a minute, that's 5,000 over 5,000. So the proposed site plan, so zoning and setback requirements adjust when a building goes from 5,000 square feet footprint to greater than 5,000 square feet. At 5,000 square feet in a Residence A zone, your front yard setback is 30 feet, your rear yard setback is 30 feet, your sideline setbacks are 15 feet. If you're on a corner lot, the front yard setback applies to both corners, so 30 feet and 30 feet. This is, the proposed is a roughly 10,000 square foot building located to the northerly side of the property, closing off any access from Atherton Street, with access at the far southerly side of the property. There are 33 parking spaces. Zoning requires 3 spaces for every 2 classrooms. There are 12 classrooms. That requires a minimum of 18 parking spaces. The next plan you'll see shows 26 spaces. This is 33 spaces. It's the maximum number of spaces that we think we can put on the site and have a safe access and egress in and out of Blue Hill Avenue. The as-of-right plan, and we show this because we don't need any zoning relief at all for this plan. We do, so from a procedural perspective, we're here really for preliminary presentation publicly. We had another meeting with neighbors a month ago We've had another meeting with the police, fire, et cetera, about 6 weeks ago. But we could go and pull a building permit tomorrow for a 2-story, 5,000 over 5,000 square foot building that would have frontage and access on Atherton Street, because 30 feet, 30 feet, 15 feet, 30 feet, because this is on a road, those are your setbacks. Parking fits within the same setbacks, 30 feet and 15 feet. So it's 26 spaces. It's parking that that introduces conflicts with perhaps stacking on Atherton Street. And according to Jack Grant, it's his worst nightmare, because if you've got people waiting to clear this light or are parked along here waiting to get in or waiting to get out, and fire alarm goes off, you got a problem. So this site plan doesn't work from Jack's perspective, from police chief's perspective, from town engineer's perspective. So we need to go to the Board of Appeals for relief from setbacks in order to do the preferred plan. The other thing I would say is, if you do actual distances as opposed to setbacks from lot lines, the distance from this building, a 2-story structure, to this dwelling is 66 feet. The distance from this corner, 2 stories, to this building with a clear view over that fence is 74 feet. If we go to the preferred plan, this distance is 157 feet, but this distance is 88 feet. From this point to this building is 88 feet. It's 14 feet further from the abutting home, and it's on the other side of all of the tall trees and foliage that's here, and we can infill that as we go. But this building will tend to sit away from as much as possible from both of the abutters. Now, one of the requests that we got the other night when we were, a month ago, with the neighbors was, well, if you can do 5,000 over 5,000 here, why don't you just do that over here? Well, one, you still need relief because you can't fit it within the setbacks, because the property narrows too much. And two, you're really forcing the provision of childcare services on 2 levels and not 1. And although 2 is acceptable, it's really not preferred. You want a situation where all of your emergency egresses are on 1 floor. So every classroom, and we'll see in a layout shortly, every classroom has its own egress outside. From emergency perspective, for convenience of parents doing the drop-off and the pickup, getting in on 1 floor and out, not navigating stairways or elevators and the like, it's a lot more efficient. Staffing perspective, you need, your administrative oversight is all on 1 floor. You're not staffing oversight on 2 floors and the like. So we think operationally, it's much better. We think for a number of reasons, this is the optimal outcome. Now, so from a number of reasons, we think this is better. It's, no access and egress at all from Atherton Street. We're not introducing any traffic to Atherton Street. We're not conflicting with the fire station in any way. The playground area is set here, far away from abutters as possible. Yeah, it's across the street from the fire station, but the playground on the daycare facility that's next door here, has the same issue and doesn't seem to be a concern. And for, some kids, they like to see the fire engines come in and out. The parking lot, this parking lot has fewer spaces. Operationally, it's less efficient. And the building, as I say, is 14 feet This is 14 feet closer than a building located here. So again, preferable for Little Sprouts from an operation perspective, emergency egress, more administrative oversight, efficient drop-off and pickup, and the ability to easily incorporate outdoor play into all classrooms, because you're not coming up and downstairs and setting your access and egress points. Here's the current space plan. You've got two infant rooms, you've got toddler rooms, and you have preschool rooms. So, and then you have other administrative and kitchen and the like. So your administrative is in your core, and then all of your rooms are around the outside and all have their own points of egress. Four toddler. Four infant rooms, right. Rendered from a bird's eye view, and I think this is set just a little bit too far that way because it doesn't show the full play area, but this is a rendered view of the site. It's a basic rendering of the building. One of the concerns we heard at least a year ago from some neighbors was that it wanted to fit, it's a two-story neighborhood for the most part. There's some capes, single one-stories, but it's two, no flat roof, gabled, something that looks like it's at least got an appearance of a story and a half, with some nice gabling detail. And you can see from, front elevation and side elevations, what the building will look like from each of its sides. Final issue, big issue, is really sort of parking, and Kevin's going to help me on this because I've wrapped my head around it now for a while, but the issue, so the program is designed for maximum of 124 children over a 12-hour day, with drop-off occurring between 6 and sort of 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the morning, and pick up at the end of the day between sort of 2:30 and 6:30 in the afternoon. There are 26 employees, 2 administrators and 24 children, 2 for each classroom. And their arrival and departure are staggered through the day. Assume, worst-case scenario, that each one of those 26 people will have a car. And so you have to account for their parking. Our traffic consultant has done preliminary traffic and parking analysis, and he's taken into account 2 nearby facilities. There's a new Little Sprouts in Dedham. Each one is a little bit smaller. This is 96 children and 24 employees. And there's one in Norwood, which is 85 children, 22 employees. He extrapolated up to the 24 and 124 and 126, and sort of did a flow over time relative to parking. And we have this sort of peak hour, we call peak hour parking chart. I'll start and Kevin will jump. But the blue accounts for employees, which are stagnant during the day. Once the employee arrives, unless he or she goes off for lunch in the middle of the day, that car is parked. You have as many as 50 to 60 coming in a peak hour time frame. And so what happens over the course of that peak hour is we're showing that there's a number of cars that will be parked for 5 to 7 minute intervals while people do drop off in the morning, pick up in the afternoon. Not all people are parked, come in at the same time. It sort of rolls across that hour. And so at any one time, you have, 4, 5, 6 that are parked, people inside. You might have someone else coming in, someone else leaving, and that come and go occurs over the course of the day. Operationally, this is the way it is netted out on an analysis of both the Dedham site and the Norwood site. Max daily parking volume would be somewhere in the 27 to 28 range. We have up to 33 spaces, so we have room if there's extra occurring. The last thing I would show before I get back to Kevin is sort of how does parking and stacking work on this site? This site is well-designed from an on-site stacking perspective. Employees will park here. Families will park over here, which means that they'll have to come all the way in, around, and down in order to park and then exit, which gives a lot of on-site storage area for people who might be coming in and have to slowly come around to grab a spot. Unlike the other side, where it was much more difficult to make that maneuver happen, and much more likely that you'll have some occasions where people are stacked out onto Atherton Street. So with extra spaces comes spaces closer to abutters, but it's a much more efficient and better. So Kevin, I think I did a decent job, so I'm going to ask you to nail in that, a
Yeah,
little bit better.
and in fact, I think you do a great job, man. But the only things that I would add is that, just to reiterate, is that Ned, the numbers that we've used to run this analysis scales up in the most conservative scenario to plan for, being entirely full with about 124 students and the 26 employees at one time. Our schools don't operate at 100% utilization. They just don't. So in the cases of Dedham and Norwood, for example, Dedham's been open since 2014, and we have 96 students. That school's licensed for about 120. Just to give you a sense for like utilization. And then Norwood has been open more recently, although we've been well received in that community. So we have 85 students today, but that'll go to 133. So generally, the way we try and think about our program is to work toward a school that has capacity of about 125 children at one time. But we typically, run our projection model as to where we think we'll be upon maturity to be around about 100 students. So I just want to call that out just for further consideration, for the board.
Thank you.
So, I think that was it. Yeah, so we're here. We're
So
happy to answer
before-
preliminary questions. I know it's the first that you've all have seen it, although we have met with, as I said, twice with the senior public safety folks in town, and we've met 3 times in neighborhood meetings that we held. One at the site, one at the library, and most recently at Fuller Village a
So-
month ago.
Sorry, Ned, were you done there? Okay, so just for background again, this is preliminary, and we've done this before where the Board of Appeal will receive an application, but they're interested in what the planning board thoughts are before they make a decision about granting variances. Then it would come back to the planning board for an official site plan approval. So what I understand right now, what's being sought is some of feedback from us about what would be going to the Board of Appeal. So what would be going to the Board of Appeal would be what is the proposed site plan. So I think one thing that we could consider is asking questions, of course, any initial comments we might have or concerns we might have that they may want to try to address before they do file with the Board of Appeal if that's possible. So with that introduction.
And I just would, if I may, just a comment on that. And I've done this in the past, 475 Adams Street, a couple of others where I've needed relief from both boards. I need the setback and other relief from the Board of Appeals. I need site plan approval from you, is I really file at the same time. And we can, if either, obviously take preliminary comments we'll have tonight, other comments we've heard from neighbors and others. But as we file, it's likely that we would initiate a hearing formally with you before we would have the formal hearing with the Board of Appeals, where you would have the opportunity to more specifically consider some comments that you would want the board to incorporate. And then we would go to the Board of Appeals with the hearing and then back to you to close out both. I think that's kind of the avenue that we would be maybe thinking about.
All right, and so before we go to questions and comments, are there folks in the audience who are neighbors to this property?
Well, I'm across from it.
You're across from it, okay. And would you like to have, address the board, or do you have questions from what you've seen presented?
So I do have a question, basically.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to come up to the table then, and to the microphone, and give us your name and address, please?
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So my name is Thuy Lei, Thuylle. My address is 227 Atherton Street. So I am on the other side of Blue Hill Ave. So my question is, I understand that there's a building that you can build as right, but then you mentioned before that even though you have the right to build this and have the child care service in it, you are still subject to certain regulation due to densities and other factor. So if, I wonder if any study on density and other factor that you brought before have been done to address this? Because at the end of the day, you're adding 150 people to that site right there, which is fairly small for that amount of people. So, and the other question I have too is that at the prior meeting, neighborhood meeting, you say that you have done a transportation study to make sure that there's no traffic in the morning and the afternoon is acceptable, and you say that you will be presented, is it here tonight, or?
Not tonight, no.
Okay, so I would like to see that too, if possible. And that's it.
So the answer to the first question, if you like, the analysis that we've done is that we can do on this layout 10,000 square feet without any relief.
Right.
We can do 5,000 over 5,000 as of right, because the building fits within the setbacks, enough open space, does all of the things it needs to do under zoning, so it fits as of right.
So I guess,
So alternative is to do what we think is a more efficient and better buffered alternative.
so I think what you're suggesting to the neighbor to this property is that the density is dictated by what you can build without needing relief.
Correct.
Right? So then if we're looking at a certain amount of density based on that, then we're looking at how to design for that density in two different approaches. But if you're perfectly willing to do what's allowed in 2 stories, I do wonder why you're not perfectly willing to do what's allowed in your alternative site plan. And the reason I ask that is, whoopsie. Keep forgetting about that. It puts the building very close to the street, and it has very little buffer for the parking, and it's asphalt on top of building, so there's not even landscape really within the asphalt. And it might be relieved some if you don't need 33 spaces and you can get by with 28, and you take 5 spaces out, that's 3 here and 2 here, and you move the dumpster away from the street, and you can have a little bit more room for buffer landscape. So those are just a couple of things based on, what the comment about, what you're looking at in terms of how many people you're putting on there and how it fits on the site, because it looks like there's a lot on the site when you look at the plan. So I guess, maybe you can talk to us in terms of your other facilities. I know it's ideal, childcare, to have it on 1 level, but are any of your other facilities 2 level?
We do. We have a small number of the 28 centers or schools that we have in the greater Boston area. I'd say 2, maybe 3 are on multiple levels. Albeit most of those schools were opened, many years ago, And, the early education industry has evolved such that it's a best practice to have the entirety of the program on one floor. And the big thrust for that rationale is for security reasons. The idea of having egress outside of the building for small children all on one floor, where we're in a two-story building, the children in classrooms on the second story would not have direct egress to get outside, creates a safer environment in the case of a fire or an active shooter.
So in your facilities that have 2 levels, what's on the second level as compared to
So
the
it's
first?
typically the older age children, they're upstairs.
The walkers?
Yeah, the preschool children are typically upstairs. And we would also typically put, so we try to limit as much as we could the number of children that we have upstairs, because again, that would create a safer environment. The other stuff we would put, other things on the second floor might include the gross motor room, which is basically like an indoor gym or play area for, when the weather's too cold or there's snow or the weather's just inclement.
And how do you arrive at, some of your facilities you said have less students than this one, so the density that you're proposing here, you could say, well, it's the number of students and therefore the number of staff and the number of drop-offs, et cetera. How did you arrive at what was going to be your number here versus what you've put on your other site?
Yeah, and the point I was seeking to make was actually that these other sites, such as like Dedham, which is nearby, and Nord, which is nearby, are similarly sized. So they actually do have capacity about, Dedham is about 120, I believe, and then I know Nord has a capacity of 133 students. And so we generally seek to target that type of scale because that's what works from an economies and financial perspective, frankly, from the school. It's a nice size where you can have floating teachers on staff if teachers need a break or cover shift changes to a degree. So from a staffing perspective, having a little bit more scale helps the operation.
Would you say, other than those 2, like half of them are that size, 3/4 are that size, just to give some
Yeah,
sense?
so, 3/4, I'd say, just like doing rough justice, and like, if we have, so I'd say about 3/4, and I was gonna try and do some math, but I won't.
That's okay.
Yeah.
If it's like a quarter versus 3/4, it
Yeah,
just kind of gives us an idea about your operations and
Yeah,
the size.
so 125 or greater is our prototype, effectively, as to what we'd seek to build out as our dream school. And many of our pre-existing schools are some of our legacy schools that, were built years ago. There is varied sizes, but generally they're over 100 in capacity.
Okay. Rich, you had a question?
Just because I was looking at the area of Dedham, and it's a lot different than this area. Do you have any facilities that are in the kind of a neighborhood like this?
Yeah, so,
For us to look at?
so what's interesting is we just launched, our most recent launch was at 73 Abington Street in Hingham, Mass, which is a single tenant location in a similar kind of residentially oriented area,
Okay, cool.
which has been received incredibly well in that community.
And is it about the same size?
It is.
But I don't think density is a subject that can be covered by this. The Dover Amendment allows municipalities to regulate some things, but I don't think density is one of them.
But is scale's not?
Now, building height, setbacks, that sort of thing, but
How much building and parking takes up the whole site and you need variances?
Kind of all in the,
It's all kind of tied together in a way,
But,
no?
yeah, but no, not, I mean, you have to be very careful about what you are looking at in terms of this kind of educational use. So I think we should stick to, we can't be talking about the number of students. That's not really an issue that we can address. We can, talk about the placement of the building and the site, the setbacks,
talking
that sort of
about,
thing. But I said, you'd have to be careful about traveling down a path where you're sort of trying to say, well, it's not the right neighborhood for this, or something like that.
that's not where I was going.
Can't be doing that.
We were talking about the placement of it, and my curiosity was what their other ones look like
Yeah.
in typical areas, because, and it wouldn't be any reason why we would say yes or no about the density, but it gives some insight into what size they need, because it sounded like, I'm not saying this is where you're going, but if you were to make that fit in, you'd have to shave a little bit off of each area, and that might be affected by what their economics was, and so it was just helpful to understand that. But I understand what you're saying.
I like the fact that the proposed site plan, going back to what the existing property looks like, is that the building is now tucked behind all the trees that are on the abutters. So that the sight line is when you're looking from Blue Hill Avenue and you're looking at those two abutting properties, is that you're not looking at the building anymore. You're now got more protection, because that, on the existing site, it's wide open, like that, see? So you would be having, if you did it as a right, the building would be right where that garage is.
Be right there.
And there's the house. So now you're looking at, with the proposal, you're looking at a building that is over to the right-hand side and is sort of blocked by all those trees that are on the abutters property. And protects that site view from their property much better than the one they could do as of right, seems to me.
April?
So can we go back to the site plan? I like the whole explanation of the first floor. I have 3 little kids, so I understand that. Speaking as a parent, think that the parent parking should be closer to the building, not the furthest away, especially if you expect moving traffic through there. But I do have questions about the entrance and exit on 138. What does your traffic study say about people coming out and taking a left and there being a light right there?
The fact that there's a light right there actually is beneficial, because it creates gaps for safe access out.
It's not, I mean, the queue isn't very long. I have families all coming out at the same time, taking a left, and other cars in that traffic. Is that going
They'll
to
have to
create
wait.
some sort of an intersection fog?
I don't think
And then
it
the other
won't.
question I have is, Blue Hill Ave dips down a little. Is this at the top of that?
Yeah.
So there's no sight line issues or anything
No.
coming out left or right?
No, with the light right there, this visibility.
I have to drive through.
You know, one of the things MassDOT, someday, when they get the money for their new approved
Does
138.
that come down here?
Oh, yeah, it goes all the way, the full length from the river into Canton. So, what their plan shows is that there will be a sidewalk on Blue Hill, on the westerly side of Blue Hill Avenue, roughly where will be a sidewalk now. 2 lanes of travel, and then a grade-separated multi-purpose path on the easterly side. They're looking at whether this would be signalized, or whether it would become a roundabout. Alternatively, the town has at least considered, MassDOT would be happy for the town to pay for the inclusion, but closing off Atherton Street, coming in behind the new fire station,
Oh, yeah.
and connecting over to Atherton, so that you don't have that V. At Bradley, correct. So, you know, you would only have Bradley and Atherton Street from the other side meeting more like a T, rather than you've got, right now, that light operates and you've got two. So, that's possible. This design works best from that perspective. So if you were to cut off access, you don't want to now have access over here. So we do want access. This is roughly almost 300 feet from the intersection to this point. It's a pretty good
Longer than it
distance.
seems, yeah. So the only other comment I have is the dumpster right at the front of your driveway. I understand, I appreciate and understand why you would cut off general access from Atherton, but I wonder if there should be a delivery and trash access from Atherton where that cutout is. Where you could put your dumpster there, and you could do trash
Yeah.
removal and
So if
whatever
I-
service delivery you have, so you're not taking up, paper or toilet paper, whatever
So
you
one
have
of the-
delivered to the site by truck,
Yeah.
wouldn't then be clogging your parking lot.
One of the questions, I guess, is, and that's there for now. Is it there for now because it doesn't want to be close to the abutters? So it wants to be here, but then again, it's here, so that's sort of front and near the entry, so creates a potential for some friction of movement.
Right.
depending on time of day of the pickup. If it's before 6 AM. it's
But you
not an
could pick
issue.
up another spot there.
And you could, and we can, and you
So the
could-
very last comment I have is you don't have I don't think you have trees on this plan, I can't see that well, and I'm half blind now in my old age, but I'm just assuming you're gonna do some sort of arborvitae screening or something for that back door neighbor where you don't have, where it's just wide open.
Yeah,
no,
and
this
we have
is
not
just
begun the
a-
landscaping elements of it. That's part of the site plan approval that we'd have to do. But you're right, there would need to be some better screening within that opening. That will take time to mature, right? So the taking advantage of the mature trees here is actually of some benefit.
Right.
What's the distance between the building and the property on Atherton Street? That one right there, the small throat, right there.
About 6 feet. 7 feet. Thanks, Jesse. That's, the closest is 7 feet to the property line, 88 feet, building to building.
Fire department talked about getting around the building.
No, they haven't talked about that. They don't want this access. They have room to get in here, and they can get it from the backside.
One more time. I do like the play space in this area. I think for security purposes, it's good that it's set aside and it can be blocked off so no one can enter, which I think is preferable in this plan as well.
Ned, you commented that there's a topographic change
Yeah.
across the property, but it's a little unclear whether any retaining walls or other things would be required in order to achieve the plan from this site plan?
Jesse, I understand retaining wall only along,
I actually think I can kind of split the difference with that 6 to 7 foot grade change from Blue Hill Ave to the back.
So can you give us your name too?
Sure, sorry, Jesse Johnson, Bowler Engineering.
Thank you.
So the plan is to probably split the difference. I'm going to be able to grade down towards the building from the edge of pavement on Blue Hill and still be able to make sure the water doesn't head towards the building. And then on the back side, I'm going to have a little bit of lift and have that raised up a little bit. And that kind of goes to the point of considering whether we would be able to have access off of Atherton for trash pickup. Unfortunately, there's a significant grade change there. We'd have to build up and level off the play area so that we'd have about a 3 or 4 foot drop off the back of the play area to Atherton Street. So that would prohibit us from getting access back there. We don't anticipate any retaining walls, or maybe just something like a 3 or 4 foot wall, nothing bigger that would need a structural input. And then we would have plenty of room all along those two abutting properties to do landscaping and get some solid screening in there.
So, to be clear, the retaining walls would not be at the property lines or close to the property lines with the abutters?
We might be, well, close, I guess define close. I might be within 10 feet, but it would only be a
retaining
couple.
walls here.
No retaining walls there. It would only be maybe in the back corner close to Atherton, and it would only be 2-3 feet high, most likely.
Okay. Because, again, I'm concerned about this buffer. Has this neighbor commented on this plan?
No, they are extremely elderly. I think he's in a nursing home, I'm not sure what her, they bought that property in the 1950s. They're in their 90s, I think it may be rented by a tenant now. 8 to 10 years ago, they were big supporters of Tom when he was doing what he was doing. Obviously, he had relationships in the neighborhood. So we haven't had any
So,
comment.
one thing you didn't address was that this plan would also require waivers from our parking design standards, correct? In terms of how close you can build the parking to the property and how many spaces before you have landscaping?
Yes, well, we haven't, there's a little bit of rework to do relative to the layout of the parking. We do need setback relief because parking areas with greater than 20 spaces require the same setback as buildings. So you do have to achieve that setback, and both of these trays of parking are within the setbacks.
Right, and I think it would be helpful to kind of mark that off on there too. I know you put the building ones on there. But I do think it's worth it if you, I'm sorry, your name?
Kevin. Yeah, Kevin Brady.
If you feel as if your maximum parking really is 28, is to give a little bit of plan relief here and not necessarily do 33. Because there was a lot of green space that you see from the street here that's going to be lost.
Particularly all
And,
right there.
and it doesn't have to be in, like I suggested, possibly here or here before, but you could take one out here, one out here, one out in these places and give some trees in there. And the trees in the parking lot will help reduce the amount of pavement you see too, with a nice understory of some plantings. You know, it's not that, I mean, most people don't necessarily walk here now, but we hope with Mass DOT and, you know, that there will be some walking and biking. And I do think this is an important thing to think about, because we talked a few meetings ago about what tall fences are like walking on Canton Ave now, and it's not desirable. So, you know, we don't want to create something that's, that feels less desirable when people start to use it. And it's, you know, I understand there's programmatic requirements in terms of how these rooms need to fit and that they have square footage requirements, et cetera. But even if there's any way to tighten up the footprint a little bit, to give some, or rearrange the footprint a little bit, to give a little more setback, I think,
Okay.
you know, that would be helpful, but it may not be possible. Yes?
Just on that, it may be hard for me to tell just to the drawing, but is there any way in the back of that property, besides going through, is everything closed off? Like, is that
Sorry?
building all the way to the end, all the way to the end?
Just setback wise?
Is there, how much space is there to
No,
get?
That's tight right there. There is a stone wall that forms the boundary line that runs the entire length of that
Okay.
property. And this is about 7 feet.
Oh, all right.
So to Cheryl's point on the buffer with the neighbor to the left, I'm looking at what's in Google Maps right now in 3D. It looks like there's some massive trees there, so there is a good tree screening. Are those on your site, or are those the neighbor's site?
So if we go back,
Yeah, that one.
all
Yeah.
of these trees are on the neighbor's site.
No, I'm talking about that, yeah.
That tree is on our site.
I'm talking about up more right there.
And then those are all on
It looks like on the
neighbor's side.
opposites, on the other side of the fence. So it's perhaps a little more screened than this would anticipate, or
It's,
that the
it-
site plan shows.
it's, right, it's fortunate in that the screening is already on the other side of the property lines, and it needs to be
Right.
enhanced, but it doesn't have to be made new out of whole cloth.
And it's something that they control.
Well, but I still think that, I mean, in my view, is that we're trying to not make our neighbors do our buffering for us. We should be doing some buffering on our own property.
Yeah, because what if they change?
Yeah.
Because now we limit what the neighbor can do with their property if they have to do the buffer, you
Yeah.
know, for their neighbor. So,
That's right.
I appreciate the fact that there's nice trees there and there are fences currently there. But where we're looking at, you know, what things you might be able to modify, I mean, those are some things that I think are worth looking at. And
Is it possible to do like the administration on the second floor and squeeze it?
that's an operational thing that, that footprint of building is just, you know, kind of feeling like a lot showed, you know, 5 pounds in a 2-pound bag, or
So-
kind of whatever the analogy can be.
And we'd like to keep the administrative offices in our plan very close to the front door, because there's a line of sight procedure. So when parents come in the door, there's one administrator at the door to see who's picking up the child, from a security standpoint. And we like to put both offices there with small viewing windows in case one administrator's
Things have changed so
away.
much
I know.
since the days when we went to school. that
Oh, yeah.
It's
I think
security,
that's
yeah.
Scary.
It totally is, and so I can completely see why you would want them on one floor, and why you want to have immediate access, and why you want the administration right there. I'm not really in favor at all of having it be 2 stories for that reason.
Well, I just think that because they said they could build a 2-story and they were happy to do it.
We're not
but-
happy to do
No,
it.
they weren't happy.
We're never
Except for
happy to do
Except
it.
for the site plan of Atherton Street. Well, all right, maybe you didn't say you were happy to do it, but you said that you could perfectly go well and file for it. So and the neighbors have asked about it. I think it's our responsibility to dig a little bit more into that question, you know, to understand it. and it may be that, you know, you have excellent sound reasons for wanting to do it that way, but I mean, it's part of our job to ask the questions.
And it's also helpful for the public to understand, if we ask the questions, it's on the mind of the public, then they hear it. It's
You know,
better
we,
for everyone.
I'll just say this, you know, that was a question that was asked of us a month ago, and we dug hard at it for the last month. I mean, I pushed. I mean, it's much easier to find the path of least resistance for any project, from a zoning perspective, but at a certain point, you have to grant the zone or the permit what is necessary, and so I pushed hard on these guys, and they spent a lot of time on site plan, moving the building, shifting it, doing different things, looking at the internal operations, what happens with vertical, you know, mobility, et cetera, with the two-story plan. There were a lot of considerations that went into a decision that ultimately said, no, we can do 5 over 5 by right, but that's not the outcome that we want, and so we try to come up with a plan that is better from a overall perspective, obviously meets their goals, but we did, you know, and you raised some really good questions about volume of parking, volume of pervious versus impervious surface, et cetera, and there are things that probably we can do, going back and looking at those things, because our initial reaction to create 33 spaces was to maximize parking on the site in response to questions that were asked about, you know, pickup and drop-offs, the making sure that you had plenty of room on the site and parking on the site so that you were not stacking out onto Blue Hill Avenue.
Yeah, that's
particularly in the pickup time in the afternoon, which coincides with the afternoon, you know, parking lot out there. So those
Well-
issues are of significance, and it's a balancing.
But, I mean, Kevin provided us with that information, and, you know, I think if you looked at all of your facilities and you came up with, you know, let's say it was 30 instead of 28, even 3-space reduction helps get some landscaping in the lot. You know what we're asking for.
Yep.
We're certainly not trying to make a safety problem on the Blue Hill Avenue or for any of the operations, but if it can be done, it would make the plan much better, the site plan much better.
Yeah.
And as far as like the building itself, and I mentioned how close it was to the street, but the facades are attractive, and so and it's not volumetrically massive, so even if you could figure out how to get a little bit of landscaping, can you go back to the plan?
Violate every setback.
A little bit of landscaping in that zone, you know, if there's any way, if you're looking at the parking in here, I don't know. I mean, if there's enough, if you could give yourself some room for some landscaping in there, that would be beneficial too. And if the fence doesn't have to go along here, but the fence could turn in here, and that landscaping is what you're walking along for part of that length, you know, it would be beneficial to have like an eye-level perspective of, you know, what this is like, kind of either this way or that way, kind of with the landscaping in the building and the parking kind of plugged in. And it might alleviate some folks' concerns about how big it's going to look on the site.
So STA likes STA's design, is that it?
Can I ask a question on the topography and the dropping of the property? The part that's up by Blue Hill Ave drops off probably 8 feet to the line of the house on Atherton, at least 8 feet.
Around that, yeah, sure.
Is there any basement in this building at all?
No, slab on grade.
So you're gonna build up that whole back corner?
Yeah, but it's actually not as, that's what I was saying, I'm gonna split the difference, I'm gonna be able to grade down to set that building lower than the actual Blue Hill Avenue grade. So the building finished floor is gonna be a couple feet lower than Blue Hill Avenue, and then I'll have to grade off on the back side towards that back neighbor to make up the difference. So I'm gonna split it, I'm not gonna do it all at the back.
Do you think, when do you think you'll have a preliminary grading plan ready?
I was expecting that when we got out of the door to hear that from the client. All right, when can we get this done? I can get preliminary grading done in a couple of weeks, but as far as a full package, getting that pulled together, that's usually 2 to 3 weeks for us.
Well, just a preliminary might be helpful too, a site section through there, because, you know, retaining walls sometimes pop up when we're not expecting them, or there's some, and it's just beneficial so that even if a neighbor, you know, is not expecting a wall and gets a wall, it's just helpful to sort that out in advance.
Sure.
There is, just take this back, there is a wall there. It is not a retaining wall, but there is a wall.
But right, so if you imagine that, right? So if you needed you're gonna build this up, if you're gonna need a retaining wall here, that changes it significantly. That's why
Understood.
they asked the question.
No, I definitely don't need.
Understood,
Yeah.
understood.
On that same picture, if you go in Colter's driveway, over on the left-hand side, keep going in. Those are the storage bins. Those storage bins are about 7 feet tall.
Yeah.
Which is, so you're gonna go halfway, split the difference and come halfway across to
We
that.
saw, yeah, we'll come back with grading plans that show how the building will sit.
Yeah,
I would say what would help with that is a section that's cut that way, you know, so we can understand how you're planning to do that.
And I've done enough legwork on the grading. I've actually done drainage design already. As it was mentioned, we've done a lot of analysis on our previous layout where we had it to the point of almost ready for submission before we scrapped it. So I'm fairly confident that I can get the grading to work without significant retaining walls.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Jenny?
Yeah, so I had the same concern that April had about the left-hand turns. So I know that you mentioned that you spoke with, I'm guessing, the traffic committee or whoever, and
Yep, and we spoke with MassDOT.
MassDOT, and you mentioned the police chief and the fire chief. So will they all be putting a letter in the file, or like will they be submitting it to
We have
us or
been making
ZBA?
comments right along to the design.
Okay,
We had a
but will that be,
preliminary-
I'm sorry.
We had a preliminary meeting with engineering, police department, fire department, DPW, and Board of Health, and Joe Brundeck.
So I guess I'm just curious, so will a letter be going into the file either with the ZBA or with this board, so it's public information?
Or how about you could do some meeting notes and you can circulate it to those people who are at the meeting and they can
So it's
initial it.
confirmation,
Just so
so
it's
we-
in writing what
Yeah,
was
we
said.
just had emails before
It's fine.
in some cases, but I think maybe that's just a request, right?
That's
I
just a
would like to
request.
see-
I think it should be public information, so the public knows that what Chief Grant said, as opposed to, you know, we have a lot of telephone around, things get changed from person to person to person, so it's great to have that. I was also wondering about all school events and where overflow parking would go, you know, like you have graduations or things like that, where,
That's a good question.
what would happen in those?
So what we tend to do is stage schooling events such that it wouldn't be everyone graduates at the same time. So we like to think about graduation by class or program, so like by age group, so infant, toddler, preschool. So that'll help manage.
Graduation for an infant.
It actually is. It's very cute and it's very an exciting day for probably more for the parents probably. But and I'm one of those happy parents. But
It's called Ditch the Diaper Day.
I think it would happen maybe once or twice a year, and we would need to come up with a plan for staff, I think, and it is my sense, and where we ask staff to park on days like that. And I don't know if I necessarily have a solution, to be transparent with you.
Can I ask one more question? How many families would you expect if you have 124 spots? I'm sure it changes, but I mean, are you expecting 50 or you have?
Yeah, so-
What's the trend?
On an all-school
Yeah.
event, the truth is, I don't.
No, on an event for enrollment.
Capacity.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
about
how-
100. So we generally model out about 75% utilization, so it'll be about 100.
And all of those are one kid families?
No, so oftentimes we we'd like to think if we're doing our job, then we get a lot of siblings. We get a lot of multiple children from the same family.
You're asking how many families,
Coming in.
not children.
Yeah. So a lot of the numbers that we've been quoting this evening are like worst case scenario. So one child for every family,
Yeah.
and we're entirely full.
But do you have any data that suggests that most of the time, this is, 2 kids in your center with 1 family, or how many kids per family?
Happens very often. Just, I can say, most of our schools have multiple children from the same family.
Okay, other questions?
Not right now.
Okay.
Giving us a lot to think about, and we appreciate your time and your comments. so.
But I do think that what Jenny suggested would be helpful to me too, to the extent that you can document whatever
Yeah.
traffic commission is willing to say. Traffic is a concern
We haven't
for me,
been formally
especially
to the
with-
traffic commission, but probably something we will.
And I'm sure they'll vote on something, so whatever you can furnish would be helpful.
And also especially like with the left-hand turn, I'm concerned about it, you're concerned about it. I know that the people who live on 38, it's very dangerous to cross.
Yeah.
I live on Green Street, as Ned knows, and I don't take a left onto, I take a right and I go all the way down to Trailside and come all the way back up every time if I have to do that, because it's very dangerous. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I might have to leave early.
Okay,
Is there anything?
You want to make this out in an hour? Would that be good, 9:30?
I have to leave too.
So
Okay.
just to confirm, your next meeting is the 17th, Tuesday night. I do a 30-second citizen petition. I filed to draft a zoning modification to address some affordability issues that you'll see
right,
on the 17th.
for Carberry, as a result of a meeting last week with the Housing Committee and the Affordable Housing Trust, right?
That's right, that's right. And
And I was planning to attend that before I was called away, so, Rich, were you at that meeting?
I'm sorry, which
Last
one?
Monday, the Housing Committee meeting?
Yes.
So you're aware of this revision, proposed revision?
And we're meeting,
So we'll get that circulated to the board, and we'll get it on the agenda. for the
we're meeting
second.
tomorrow at DHCD just to,
Okay.
Yep.
So you've got that?
their issues.
Okay.
Not about this other one.
Okay, thank you, Ned.
Thank you.
All right, so the next items that we have in terms of projects, not the budget, which would be 131 Elliott and 475 Adams, both are Mr. Conley. I think the 131 Elliott will be quick, and I think 475 Adams, it depends how much discussion we all want to have. But is there one of those in particular that you feel like you want to be here for? We could take one or the other first.
475 Adams.
Or we
is
can
your
do both
neighborhood.
of them
Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah, why don't you just start talking, start going.
Okay, let's do the,
Jump
Mr.
in, let's
Conley, come
go.
on up.
We have a lot to talk about.
Okay. Yeah, okay. All right, thank you. Thank you for
Do you,
coming in.
Rich, do you prefer to start with 475 because that's East Milton? Or?
Is that which one we're starting with?
I don't know, I think Cheryl's asking.
That's
which
what I'm
one you-
Oh, yeah, start with 475. Sorry, yes.
Start with
Oh, that's okay.
475
Sorry.
Adams.
I didn't want to get
In my head, I was
into
like, yeah, and I guess I didn't say it.
you had other things on your mind.
Yeah.
I think that one is,
Appropriately.
I think that
So,
one is.
my name is Stephen Connolly,
I do too, I think.
one of the owners for 475 Adams Street. And I'm here tonight to discuss some changes that we had in the landscape plan. When I had our final inspection with the building commissioner, he suggested that we talk with the planner, and subsequently we get on the agenda here to discuss the few changes that were made on the site and see where we're at with things. Essentially, if you have a, Phil, can you put, if you have the plan, you could put it up, if everyone has a copy of it.
We have it. We got it.
Okay, great. So essentially, the layout is the same. The change that was made is when we had the building in place and we got the parking lot, the rough grade for the parking lot and the drive, it became obvious that we had to put a short retaining wall in place along the property line, the back property line, I call it, from the Adams Street all the way back to the corner, the far corner where the Stocks live in the Jubenville property line. So we have a retaining wall there, and what it actually did, it created a nice green space on the back side of the pavement towards the neighbors, And it also created a nice planting space above. So what it resulted in is, for example, instead of the 8 arborvitae that it calls for along that property line, we wound up with 33, which I think is a plus.
Yeah.
And we covered off that shed that the church put in place, which didn't look too good. And also, especially where the Stock family installed a 6-foot vinyl fence, and we put in 9 and 10-foot arborvitae there to give them more coverage, so, you know, they're not looking directly into the property, so they were happy with that.
Steve, those last arborvitaes, when did those go in?
2 weeks ago?
Okay, so maybe before these photos were taken?
Yeah, I have photos I can email Bill.
Okay.
And I took some photos today, too.
Oh, you took them today, so does it
Yeah.
look different than when I took these, which was the end of November, mid-November?
No, I walked by there when I was
there
at the
now?
post office. So there's a
Okay.
lot more.
There's a lot more there now.
There's a whole
Okay.
lot more.
Because one of the things, Steve, was that one of the neighbors had sent an email, I think to you or to Bill, and I think you sent it to me, and you had some dialogue back and forth with that neighbor about the screening
sorry,
and
I was
about
just
the
like-
lighting,
Right,
right?
correct.
That's my cat.
So can you just give us a recap now, where,
That's so bad.
your understanding of what,
That's so
how the
sad.
neighbor feels about what you've done now?
So what I did is, I had a
that's
conversation
along
with the neighbor, and I summarized it with
That's
3 points.
Come in.
And I forwarded it to, his name is Dan Stock, so I forwarded it to him
That's the one with
first to make
juvenile.
sure that he was in agreement with the summary of our
fence
conversation, which he was, and he
Do they have little
emailed me
things
back that he
coming?
was, and I forwarded that to,
They're going to come.
to Bill and also to the building commissioner. And what the synopsis of it was that we changed the lights on the back of the building because he'll do some spillage into, he was uncomfortable with some spillage into his property. We changed those lights and he was satisfied with that change. I took a picture of the lights tonight, actually, because, you know, it's not even close to
Okay.
his lot line now. And also, when we agreed to put in the arborvitaes along his fence line, he was very happy with that. So those were the 2 main things.
Okay,
Also, you know, there was other thing, has nothing to do with sight line. He wanted some shades up on the first, because when they first started to
All right.
operate, you know, they didn't have window treatments, but they do now, and I think they're ordering better ones as well, so. but,
so as far as, just for background, I think we all know that we've expressed our desire to the building department to come back to us if there's changes in what's built, hopefully before they're built, but even so. So I think that's why Mr. Prondak has come back and asked us to give him our thoughts about these changes, right? Because he knows the planning board takes an interest in the changes. So there's, I think, 2 ways we can handle it. If we're comfortable with the changes, and we've heard what the neighbor thinks, that we can consider it de minimis changes and find them to be acceptable. And if not, then we would have to ask for an application for a site plan amendment.
So
I would move that the changes are, we take a vote to see whether or not the changes are minimal. I think they are, and
Okay.
that we would approve them as a minimal change and approve the landscape plan.
And we don't have a plan that
I mean,
reflects
land-
it, but
the
as
landscape
the
changes, yeah.
installation.
Yeah.
Mhm. Denny?
I thought that they were de minimis. I did recall there was a discussion about trees, but at the end of the discussion, we recognized that we couldn't fit trees. And when I went to the site tonight, I could see why we
Right.
couldn't fit them. I did feel like he put green everywhere he possibly could. And so I very much appreciated that. And there's a lot of little things that are coming up in the future too, especially along the front, and little things around the side that I think are gonna look beautiful in a year or two. And the arborvitaes, they generally grow a foot a year, so I think the neighbors are gonna like him more and more each year as it goes. And going up, and having them go up on
On the wall.
the wall, thank you, actually gave it a little height, so there's a little kickstart there. So I was pleased, and I thought the structure looked beautiful. I thought that came out really nice, too. So I think this is
Great.
Okay.
I also think the building looks beautiful. I've been very excited every time I drive by, and I've heard nothing but positive things. And actually, the board has heard positive things too. At our last Judy
Yes.
Barrett session, somebody who
That's
is
right.
concerned about some other things said they would like to see more of this architecture, so good job. And I do think that, I'm happy that you made the decision to put in the retaining wall, because I don't know what it would look like if you didn't. So, the one request I would have, though, in the future, if this happens, is if Joe Prondak could write us a memo so we could hear from him what the inconsistencies are. I don't think that's too much to ask, and I think it would help us to prepare when we go there to know. I mean, there were supposed to be 8 arborvitae and there's 33. That to me doesn't seem like that big of a deal. And just would be helpful.
Yeah, and there was
I think it
also-
would be helpful for us in the future if we go back to this project and we haven't changed the site plan, and we look at the vote and we just say it's de minimis. We don't have any documentation of what actually changed.
Right.
So it would be helpful if we could paper trail that.
The other thing that was beneficial was that there was like layers. So you have arborvitae, and I think we added 3U. So those 3Us add further barrier and a sense of depth of field. So those would be good notes to have on file, that there were actually real improvements.
So I'm hearing, Steve, if you could take the site plan that we have and mark on it what you've actually installed roughly, at least in quantities and approximate location, approximately where the wall is, and that can go in the file to accompany what we've talked about in the photos.
Okay.
Okay?
But I
Looks
also want to stress, I hope he doesn't have to hire a professional, because,
No, I don't think we need it. I just said if he marks it himself on it.
We'll sketch it and we'll take
Yeah.
it, lay one out, and we'll get in what we need to.
And so we did have, I did have one question as to what happened to the mile marker.
I don't know. The first I heard of that is when Bill emailed me that you had a
Yeah.
question about that.
Yeah.
And I went back on my records with the demolition request with the Historic Commission, and
Yeah.
I don't have anything on that, so I don't have a
Wow.
firm answer for you. No, I don't know.
Did you even know there was one there?
I didn't, and when I heard it, I was like,
It
well,
was set in the wall, yeah. That was amazing, that the Historic Commission didn't have anything to say about it.
no. And I looked at the initial rejection,
Yeah,
and then, the 9-month delay and all that, and
Right,
I
yeah.
don't have anything there, so.
wow.
do you think a prior owner could have taken it?
It could have
Well,
walked
if it wasn't
away
noticed, it
with
would just
somebody
get
and,
demolished, right?
you know.
During construction
Yeah.
demo.
I mean, but that's a shame, because.
It's a real
Yeah.
shame.
I know.
Because that was,
Yeah, but.
been there for quite some time,
Yeah.
probably 200 years.
See, I didn't notice it when I went to the site walk, and I'm pretty,
Yeah.
I love stuff like that.
After you said it, I remember it there.
Yeah, yeah, right, right.
Oh,
But I didn't notice it, So I don't know if it was.
Oh, really?
You know how things.
So, but anyway, so I made a motion, do we have a second?
Oh, I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All
Thank you.
right, now we'll move on to 131.
Sure, yeah. So,
Is that fast enough?
That was good.
Yeah, it's good, thanks.
Rich, I want your kid to be sick every other Thursday.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
I'm totally kidding. I honestly don't want it.
You want one at 3?
I'll take one for the team next time.
Yeah, I had to do travel for a sick kid, you know.
Is that what it was? I was
Oh,
wondering.
no, I
Is she
was worried
okay?
about that.
I was in Paris with a sick kid, yeah.
Oh.
She is
I wouldn't
better,
mind
yes,
going to
thank
Paris
you.
for a second.
I'm gonna rent one.
I'll
rent one.
Get on a plane for a
used to
loved
it.
one, it's like no fun.
All right.
I was
Okay.
just glad I didn't have to bring her home. All right, so the special permit for 131 Elliott requires a review of the building materials. There was a question about whether it actually does require, and the sentence says, "Precise colors and materials shall be discussed at a materials conference between applicant and the planning board." So thank you, Steve, for following up on that and sending in your rendered elevation and the materials you have with you.
This is another project that has me giddy. I sat down on the sidewalk every day of the deconstruction of the other building, taking pictures. People thought I was crazy.
So, can I just ask a quick question?
Yes.
Is this the side that's facing central? Central?
that view would be right across, if you were standing in front of the wine and cheese shop looking right at it.
Oh,
wine and cheese, from the plate, you know, where the plate used to
oh, yeah, yeah.
be, looking right in from there.
Because you may recall is that we did meet when it was before the zoning board for a different permit.
Yes, we did.
And it was a different design.
Much
So
different.
I was trying to figure out where the heck this was.
This is a partial elevation, not a full
Yes,
one.
it's
But
just-
just to give you us an idea of where this palette is.
Right.
And you have the actual
Yeah, if you wanna-
materials
I have
yourself?
some materials for you, but
Back, I think
it's
we're
just
up
what's
Elliot.
on the,
Yeah.
essentially what's on the plan.
Here, Abby, play it.
Yeah,
Because this comprehensive permit was different, it had a wall along that way. It was-
right, right. There was like a little park thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Exactly.
Oh,
So Steve,
amazing.
do you just want to run through us with the materials quickly with us?
Sure, so what I have is, the brick was actually spec'd out with the special permit. I believe that brick was used, I don't know,
Was it at 36 Central?
it was either 36 Central or something to do with the color that was on the sidewalks, or, you know, the brick, I don't know where it came from. but it was-
36 Central.
36 Central, but it was spec'd out anyway, so that's the brick color, and you just go down the list, we have a precast lintel across the top of the brick as a divider after the first floor. You have the siding, which is, the color is, they're all tones of gray essentially.
Is that a fiber cement type board?
It is, we're going with a product, an Advantech product this time, instead of Hardy Plank, and we did some research with that with the Sullivan Architects, they're comfortable with it. It has a good warranty on it, and,
It's one of those pre-finished?
yeah, it's the engineered wood, you know,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
from my perspective, I think it's gonna be better for nailing. Hardy Plank with the way it's nailed and applied.
Yeah, I've heard that there's been some issues with
Yeah,
that.
it's not, so this is a better, I think it's a better product for what we're doing.
So it's actually
Come in
quite, it's
you know, the
an engineered wood
pre-painted.
more than a fiber cement.
Yes, yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's the wood grain version that you're using on the siding?
On the siding, but the trim, that's strictly for colors now. The trim will be the smooth and the siding will,
Smooth,
yeah,
okay.
we'll have it. But it's just to show the color, and,
And then this is a solid panel? with-
yes, right, like for the bays and for the highlights on the balconies. And,
And that's, okay, see it there? This is the precast, the lintels,
yeah,
and
and the shingles are
this
black.
is the shingle, and the windows are black. Okay?
And, we're excited about,
What kind of window?
Pella.
Okay.
When do you expect to occupy this building?
Well, I would say it would be a year from now,
Yeah, that's what I was,
what we're thinking.
so it's like an 18-month cycle-ish,
15.
15.
It's been, it was a tough, tough 5 weeks now with weather, with wet
Yeah.
and things like that, but we're getting there.
Yeah, you're making
Working-
progress.
Yeah, it's,
Oh, it's great to see.
And I have to say, the interface of the intersection, which is challenged, with your construction vehicles, hasn't been bad.
no, it's.
I would have expected more disruption.
Thank you. We've been conscious to stick with the management plan of, especially with the heavy trucks coming in to and from out of River Street.
Yeah.
And there's actually a good staging area on River by the old Star Market.
Oh,
You know,
right,
there's-
yeah.
Before you get to the trolley track, so there's a
Sure.
nice staging area. They come in, back in, and get out. So it's worked out pretty well so far.
Yeah, I mean, so what we really, what I'm kind of thinking about is just making sure that the materials that you're using are great because they would affect the kind of, the cost of the condo owners.
Yes.
And the association going forward.
Right.
Maintaining those kinds of things, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we want a quality product. I live in town. I'll be answering for this for the next, God willing, 30 years or whatever.
After all of this, it better look good, Steve.
It better look good, or else I gotta go, you know?
You have to go into witness protection.
Yeah, I know.
What's that?
Roof shingle,
The roof shingle is
architectural,
architectural, yes,
25,
35.
35, thank you.
So, Bill, for the,
Might even be a 40. I want a good shingle on this one.
30 years, you don't want to have to come back.
I don't want to have to
for
go back.
for the file, Bill?
No coming back.
Excuse me, I think, I've noticed on some other special permits, they've actually included this in the record. of this, like, I think on 36 Central, I noticed that. So will this drawing and the photograph be going in the record?
Yes.
Okay. As part of the special permit record? Okay.
Yes, it's going in, and we keep this for X period of time.
Sure.
Okay. All right.
Do we
Any?
vote on that or no? We don't need to vote,
Yes.
do we?
Yes, we do. I was going to ask, are there any other questions or comments about it?
I think it looks great.
Good, then I'll take a motion.
I would move that we accept the materials plan submitted by the,
Second.
Yes.
I'm in
Oh,
favor.
all in favor?
That was
Aye.
bad.
All right.
Like a pow.
Thank you,
That's
Steve.
pretty
Thank you.
easy.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks.
Bye, thanks.
Have a good weekend.
You too, have a good night.
All right, I do, and Rich, I don't, if you don't have time for this, the planning board annual budget discussion, that budget needs to go in
Now,
now.
Oh, I do want to stay for that.
if you look at these circled numbers down in the...
This is from
We're
last
going off
year.
last one or the year
This is
before?
last
This was last year's. Former warrant committee member, Rich.
This is,
We got cut though.
Yeah, I mean-
it got cut, but it got brought up,
Oh, okay.
brought back.
It got brought back up with one-time funds.
Oh, right, okay.
You remember that?
Yeah.
So we have a very austere year coming,
Right.
and where before we had a increase of 1.9% in general expenses, where no raises were expected to be, no increases, not raises, increases were, was what we were asked to do, no increases. Level funds were less,
But we also have some stuff coming up.
yes.
Is the level fund intended to be the 15,000 or the 50,000?
It would be the 50,000.
Well, given the amount of work that we anticipate East Milton Square may require, I'd like to go in with the 50, in knowing that we may be asked to
Cut back.
cut back if,
Yeah, we've got a lot of things coming up. I wouldn't want to see us.
Did we spend all of our resources last fiscal year? Or this current?
this current fiscal year, I think we will by the time we're done.
Okay, but we don't have
Between-
them all committed yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
And same thing with master plan implementation.
Do we have an idea how much we will spend for the next fiscal year?
We can get to it.
Yeah.
Right now, we're, part of this next discussion on the East Milton is that Judy Barrett sent Bill and I an email following the public meeting, and she wants us to get on a phone call and talk about some potential revisions to what they outlined as the next steps. And I think she said what she really recommends would require additional fee. I asked her to put that together. We haven't received it yet, but I'm hoping we have that discussion at our next meeting, that we'll have it from her. Then we can talk about what her thoughts are with that. That's why we're not really ready for that yet because we don't have it, but that's,
So I'm good with just submitting what we submitted last year and see what happens.
You may not have it by that next meeting either, only because she's in Hawaii.
all right. So then if, otherwise
But
we
she'll
can
send it-
circulate the,
Yes, as soon as she sends it, I will
circulate what she sent, but also my comments that went back to her, to everyone.
I mean,
At least she'll have the context
Yeah,
of
that
it.
would be good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
We have some other things that we spent money on, the bike and ped, because our original traffic budget got cut, so we had to come up with the bike and ped piece. That came out of MPIC. The Milton Center, which we really hadn't accounted for, but we're paying for that one too.
They're from the MPIC,
Right.
right. So MPIC is going to be down to,
So we're gonna wind up spending that one out very quickly.
right. So that and that's what we thought, that we would have the 50 for East Milton. I mean, when we were putting this together last year.
Yeah, I'm good with whatever you guys decide. My only comment is I just want to make sure we don't, like, I'm as conservative as the next person fiscally, but like, these are small dollars compared to our budget, and they mean so much to people in the town.
Yes, they do.
And so I wouldn't want to see us cut, like, I mean, if we needed 60,000 and it's 10,000 more than the 50, I think we should ask for it because it's that important.
We can ask,
I was making those numbers up, but you get what I'm
yeah.
saying.
I think one thing that, the way I've thought of it anyway, is, and the way the Master Plan Implementation Committee has thought of it is, the funds in both of those can be a little fluid between the initiatives that both are working on. So if more monies are needed for something from MPIC, then because Planning Board doesn't have enough, or vice versa. I think that's what we did in
Yep.
Milton Village, and I think it worked
We've
out.
done
We
that
just used
in
it.
fiscal
long as the two
18,
bodies
fiscal
agree.
19,
Yeah.
and fiscal 20.
Well, and MPIC funds, the Planning Board and Select Board need to approve use of anyway. So we would definitely be involved in those.
Yep.
But it's just, we ended up tapping into both to get as much done as we could in the
Yeah.
past, and I think we would do the same going forward, Rich. So if we were short 5 or
Yep.
10 or
Okay.
something, we're not going to have like
Makes sense.
50 in master plan, but we'll have some.
We don't need any extra for like traffic studies and all those.
We will ask
come
for
out of-
additional from MPIC again, because we cut that back at the last, right before town, or right at town meeting last year, and divided that into 2 years is what we said, because we couldn't do the full, right?
Correct. And the answer to that question is yes, we will need more money. No, we don't need it for the model, but we need it to run the model.
Okay.
So as we start, we have an initial database, but in order to start looking at more areas, we need more money to plug in new numbers into the model.
Okay.
So do we have reason to believe that we need more than the 50?
You aren't going to get it.
I don't think we're gonna get it either, but I do support
But we should be
Rich's
asking for it because
request.
you're setting,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
setting the expectation that this is what we're, like, in my opinion,
Yeah.
like, thinking back on the warrant committee, people should be asking, like, at least
What
say,
they
this
really
is what
need."
we will need.
Yeah.
You may give me this, but chances are I'm coming back and asking for this because, or else the town isn't gonna be able to progress forward with some of the projects we're working on.
But Bill, the Traffic Mitigation Committee was going to recommend in their report, did we get that yet? Have they issued that yet?
No.
My understanding is that they're going to be recommending a staff person at Public Works who would be responsible for monitoring it. And so it seems to me at that point, that's an operating budget item and not a planning study item.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
No, one of the things they will recommend a traffic engineer,
That's,
so that instead of having our civil engineer who looks at our water, our sewer, our transportation issues, somebody who is dedicated to transportation.
but my larger point is, if it's an ongoing expense, that becomes an operational versus a planning. But if we need to add to the model, because we're not going to be able to do the whole town, then that can come out of a planning
Yes.
study, I think.
We did cut back,
Right,
because they cut us from 115 down to 85.
right.
I had to go back and,
Cut back how much we
Slice.
could do, right. Denny?
So we talked about this a little bit at the last meeting. I've been thinking a bit more about it, the potential for a fiscal impact analysis of
East Milton?
East Milton and possibly the village. And the reason I'm bringing it up now is because we're going to talk about the village next week. But if there's money left in the budget this year, this fiscal year, that gets us to June, maybe it's a matter of borrowing this for that.
Okay.
But that's just another item that I think would actually help in the public process, to help the citizens visualize what kind of businesses could
Are you
work.
talking about the fiscal impact of doing the development or market kind of analysis of what
Well,
would be successful, like business?
So what would be
needed?
successful as business and the impact on the town revenues? So in other words, we'd need a new enforcement officer. If we have X number of units, we'd need a new this, we'd need a new that. So that we just have an understanding, because it might sway the way that we think about it. Because if we think about, oh, we're doing this to get revenue for the town, that's one thing. But we also might be thinking of, well, we're actually not going to get that much revenue, but we will get affordable housing, which is something that we need. That will shift the way that we think about, how we think about these overlays.
How could somebody do a fiscal analysis? I mean, I'm asking because,
Yeah.
without knowing what you're going to get.
Well, so that's what I was just getting. So one thing I would like to talk about at some point is economic development. There was Leroy Walker at town meeting gave an excellent speech.
Yeah.
Charlie, you should
Watch it, it was great.
About our capital needs and our operational needs and our resources being so slim in Milton, and that this is a very big problem that nobody really seems to be talking about. And I know that's for sure on the capital side from the capital planning committee. And he listed a whole list of things that we could do to reduce our spending, which are not politically palatable, I think is how he described them, which is cut benefits to public employees and a lot of things, all of which do apply, and he was very smart in the way he set it up. The one thing he didn't mention is the opportunity for economic development.
Right.
And I've been following some threads on Facebook and other places about concern about widespread economic development, changing the character of the community and all these things. And I think there's an opportunity for us, perhaps in the village, certainly in East Milton, to talk about strategic economic development planning from like a Judy Barrett perspective. So what I was thinking is perhaps there's an opportunity to ask her to expand her scope to the Milton Village and do sort of a very basic economic development assessment. What she thinks is actually we could attract there from a business perspective and what is even feasible. And I know somebody like her could do that pretty quick, and it wouldn't be like a full-depth RKG economic analysis, which costs us $100,000, but she could help us outlay what the potential is. In a small area like that, I can't imagine that that's going to be super expensive, and it would almost be asking her for a gut check, but she does this work all over the place, and I think that might be worthwhile, because that could help people understand what the potential
Because
is.
if we have to build a new school and 3 fire stations, what tax base are we using for that?
So one thing I hear
Kathleen, I
about,
agree with you, so I want to be able
Yeah.
to say, so that's the other assessment that I would like to understand. We have an assessment that says the village, if you put 156 units in and da-da-da, if you do this, X, Y, Z, we have 500,000 in revenue. But what we don't have next to that in the next column is, what are the town services costs?
so that I think, Denny, you can't get until you have a
You
proposal.
cannot have a project.
But you would have to know, well, the same way that they figured it out for this column, you would say, okay, so there's 155 new units here. That's going to impact the sewage, that's going to impact the ambulances, that's going to impact traffic enforcement, parking enforcement. That's going to mean we're going to need to update the roadways and the infrastructure.
My point on it is that we're not necessarily looking at residential development. So, because I'm thinking that in the village, some part of it could be residential, but some part of it could be something else. That's commercial buildings now. Why couldn't they be used for different commercial purposes, not for residential? So I'd like to sort of see I think the point that April's making is that have Judy take a look to see what kind of businesses could we attract there.
No,
I don't want to be saying that we're only going to be doing housing. I want to see some idea what can happen in both East Milton and the village that could help with the commercial side, not the housing side. We got housing all over the place here. But
Yeah,
just
but
sort
the
of-
overlay is mixed use,
Yeah.
in part because it brings additional vitality.
Yeah.
You're going to have housing over your retail. You can still, it's just
Yeah.
giving an alternative. You can do the business.
Yeah.
And the problem with some of the, we've talked about some, is that we have small sites. We have
Yeah.
parking requirements that can't be met on those small sites. And if we wanted to address the underlying commercial zoning as another matter, the overlay is only
Yeah.
addressing parking from an overlay point of
Right.
view. But in my couple of years of looking at this with
Yeah.
the consultants and others, is my feeling is on the underlying side, we have underlying issues with the
Yeah.
parking requirement.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
By Rich.
So,
So I'm sorry, Rich, just so from your point of view, you're happy with the 50,000 for now in terms of the
I
request?
was just getting that, like, again, from what I was in the warrant committee, I would want to hear you go low, but I'd like to know if you're really
But they're
thinking.
really-
Because at the end of the day, nobody wants you to come back and say, oh, by the way, we need 30 grand more, and they're gonna say, well, why didn't you tell us that? So we could have been thinking about it.
Okay, so I guess what I would say is, if this has to go in now, and we have some suggestions of what other, we know additional scope from Judy, we can talk to her about what it would take to get to zoning, a draft zoning in East Milton, and to add some market analysis. And that'll at least be the backup for the amount that we request,
Yeah,
okay?
I would, thanks, awesome.
Okay, thanks, Rich.
So should we vote on that, or do we not?
We do need to vote on it, but we just need a simple majority. Do you want to do it? You
Yeah,
want to be
let
on the
him
vote?
Let's quick before
Okay,
you
so
leave.
somebody
Okay.
make a motion that our request for planning studies to go to the select board will be at a level of last year of 50,000.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right, thanks,
Unanimous.
Rich.
There we
Yeah.
go.
Thanks, Rich.
You want
Good
to stick
luck.
with the same
Good
thing
luck.
on
Hope he
MPEG?
feels better.
Yeah,
And Rich, 30 on MPIC, 30,000 for
Yeah.
master plan?
Yep.
Okay, there was a motion,
So moved.
Second.
second, and unanimous.
I heard a yay from the hall.
All right.
So, can we just get back to this one point, is that I think that doing some sort of market analysis would be helpful for us in various places in town. But I think that your concern is correct too, like I think that any project, so this is one comment I had on actual zoning, which I don't think we're discussing tonight, is I wanna make sure that impact analysis sentence, cost analysis sentence is just a little more clear. And it gives us the power to mitigate that. So if there is a 100-unit housing development, which probably can't even fit there anyways,
No.
with some sort of high, senior housing or something with high needs or something, it's gonna cost more than it's gonna give, that we have some way to mitigate that, or we can decline them because of it. But we can't do that until we have the application. But I think that's something we can look at in the zoning and make sure that's really, that language is strong.
I just want to make sure people understand, for example, 88 Wharf was built, there's, how many units again, Bill?
73.
73 units. And then, they have
That's just a
parking,
massive space.
they have parking below it. And if you're just thinking about, that's not age restricted, but there's very few young children, or school-age children living there. The other thing is these buildings, because of the mixed-use type, they're all sprinklered. So you have fire protection systems in them, the fire department, it's all hardwired, tied to they're all monitored. Like, in terms of safety, it's actually improving the quality of safety that's there now in terms of the buildings themselves and the needs from the fire department. So I do think we have to be mindful of the type of market we're talking about. We're not talking about single families when we're talking about units. And when we're talking about units, we're talking about an average of 900 square feet for these units. When he did his analysis, it's basically 900 square feet, which is a 2-bedroom unit, where the unit sizes, that unit count that is at 88 Wharf, those are very large units. You could probably have double the number of units in the same square footage under today's kind of standards on unit sizes. So I just think we have to be careful using unit count as our measure for everything, because I don't think it's only one of the measures that we should really be considering, I
So
think.
one other point that came up at town meeting was the pressure on the school district. And there was a couple of mentions about allowed growth in the future and how that's gonna, new residences and how that's gonna impact the school, which I thought was interesting, because I don't think we have a lot of growth potential, or certainly not permitted growth potential, so I'm curious about that. But I think that's even more reason for us to support multifamily housing first and foremost, as opposed to very large single families, because there's so much evidence to show there's so few kids in those buildings. So that's just on my soapbox, but for us to think about in the future. But the last thing I want to say is I really would like to have a conversation about economic development at some point. And Allison actually mentioned to me that one site that's off the river over off Neponset Valley Parkway, Truman Parkway.
The old, yeah.
Yes,
site.
that
Yeah,
abandoned
right.
warehouse
Yeah.
industrial site where there's
Yeah.
fires and who knows
Yeah.
what. And I've talked to a couple of people about this, and every time I do, they poo-poo me and say there's no access from Milton. But Allison had a good idea and said that she believes, and she was gonna look into, that the budding community has to give you access to a site if it's on your tax rolls and you have no access but through their community. And I really think that's
I'm gonna research and see if there's an opportunity for us to access it
yeah,
through
It's a
Boston.
brownfield, there's a lot of challenges.
I think there is, because we had that problem with the 40B in Middleborough, where all the access and the services went through Lakeville.
Yep. I think it
So-
depends on the project
Yeah,
that you're doing,
right.
but I think.
I mean, the trick with economic development planning, which of course is my industry, is that you plan it around the periphery of your town so that you don't have as much impact in your town. And that's a perfect spot under that model. It's not exactly
Yeah.
responsible planning from a regional perspective, but it's something we should look at. If we're talking about how to grow revenue, and that's not a simple project, of course, but that is a potential location.
Yeah.
I think one of the other things that,
I've looked at it from my kayak.
I'll point out in terms of, John Cronin has, in my time knowing him, pointed out a number of times that the multifamily residential developments in Milton are the largest taxpayers in Milton.
Yeah.
And that includes Fuller Village, it includes 88 Ward.
Yeah.
And so if we think about these mixed use where it's multifamily, first floor commercial, we're getting that tax revenue off of that multifamily. And then we're getting the kind of retail that serves people's, sort of social and other personal business issues. Not
Don't
like
forget
a big
we-
office building, for example.
We tax commercial, we have a split tax rate here, so we tax commercial users higher than residential users.
Right.
So, I mean, there is an advantage to think about how to grow that pie a little bit, and it doesn't have to mean we're putting Vertex, in East Milton Square. It could be small marginal improvements, but if we're talking about how to solve our financial challenge, which is incredibly real, you have to look at everything, and that's one thing that wasn't even mentioned, so it's something I think that this body could have
Yeah.
some sort of a role.
No, that would be good.
Well,
Because I know from
That's what I
doing,
think.
working with CPCs in other towns, we've always made the argument and always won the argument that, spending the money on the open space was made more sense than allowing single-family houses, because cities and towns lose money on every single-family house.
And that's all we built here.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
all.
one of the things that the master plan,
Yet the property values in our town go up every single year. I mean, so the residents are very fortunate to live in town of
But
houses.
their taxes are
But
going
their
up every
taxes are
year,
going
too.
up every year.
And
they're
there's got to be a tipping point, and it's sort of,
Yeah.
if you can't, if we have these overcrowded schools and we don't have the resources to build a new school and we don't pass an override, which who knows if that would happen, then the school system suffers and the property values suffer. If we don't have appropriate fire stations that can't respond
Yeah.
to houses in a timely fashion, your insurance goes through the roof. I mean, there's a lot of implications that luckily we haven't had to deal with, but hopefully no one ever has to deal with them. And I think we need to start thinking a little more creatively, and I know there is no economic development arm in Milton because we're at like 4 or 6% or something of commercial. But we could think about how to move it up 1% and what that would mean.
so one of the things the master plan recommended was
It would pay for our
considering
There you go.
a medical overlay district, because one of the things that we do have is a hospital here that is taking its tax-paying operations into Quincy, into other towns, because we don't have a place for them to have their medical offices. We should be looking hard at that.
Well, that's an opportunity, right?
It's in my mind, it's a growing operation since, since the Beth Israel
Yeah.
took it over. They've only been growing and they're not really looking in Milton, and I think that's something we
Right.
should talk about.
And that's a service for residents. I don't think, that's different than saying we're gonna put a Walmart here. I mean, I think people want to have a doctor that they can get to locally.
Good,
I
yeah,
know I do.
yeah.
Rich's son does tonight.
All right, well, again, on the 17th, we're going to have this, I think what's going to not take long, this revision on the zoning for Carberry, the affordable housing. That's really coming about, I think, a little bit from what we learned about
Pulte.
DCD. And then focus on the village, and we'll have an update, we hope, from
On the-
Merit, on the scopes for East
And the ice
Milton.
house.
And the ice house. So, Bill, we have ice house. Yeah, put on that.
So
Okay?
where are we on his Board of Selectmen appointing a committee to look at historic districts? Has anything happened with that?
I don't know. I have not asked about that recently.
Is that something that we can do? I know we talked a while ago about sending a letter to the Board of Selectmen to encourage them to do this.
We can. So Allison, or Bill, how about Allison? That sounds like something that you could
Yes,
draft,
it'd be
right?
great.
With your
Absolutely.
CPA
It's
experience.
just, whatever the Historic Commission has requested, it's been stuck for a long time.
Yeah, I
And-
think if you just reached out to,
Steve or
O'Donnell,
or
yeah.
And even
Meredith,
if you
yeah.
could just
Or
bring
Meredith, right.
send us a draft letter that we can say we like or we don't like. You can vote on something and send it, and I don't think it has to be aggressive necessarily, but just, I would like
We're
to
in a
express
hurry.
support for the Historic Commission to at least create a study to look at it.
Yes.
Absolutely.
okay, and
Thank you.
with that, I think, let's take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 9:08.